Hi, I'm Allison and I'm the Executive Director at Spark, a Center for Social Research Innovation. Welcome to today's Spark Talk. You can visualize qualitative data. All right, let's get started. Okay, so let's start with the problem. And that is that the product of most qualitative data analysis is themes. Often you also have frequency data, like the percentage of people who referenced a particular theme or the number of times a phrase was used. And then the researcher picks quotes that highlight the theme. So because of this, themes are picked based on common perspectives. You're coding individual interviews, then you're looking at, okay, what are the codes that are common across interviews? Okay, so here's a theme picked out across multiple interviews. That's really what the process of coding is all about, is finding these patterns. It's much more tricky to represent the range of opinion around a researcher identified theme. And because of that, it's often left out of qualitative analyses because people feel real pressure around there's only so much that they can put in a paper. And when you have, 30 even, you have 30 interviews of an hour, and then being able to get that into a form that it's readable to people, there's only so much you're able to really work with the nuance and the divergence of opinion. And it's often a sort of safe bet to focus on, okay, these are the themes that cut across the wide range of people. So we're going to look at options for data visualization that not only make engaging with qualitative data fun and interesting for people, but also allow us to be able to show divergence while still being able to find dominant patterns and bringing that directly to the audience of your research. The lens that I'm going to be speaking from and the examples that I'm going to be presenting are really grounded in research evaluation and organization metrics out in the world, because for many of you, you will not be spending your life in academia. And so I want to be sure that when we're talking about data visualization, it's still useful to journal articles, it's still useful to academic contexts, but it's centered on the kinds of data and the kinds of visuals that you are likely to be encountering throughout your life. Okay, so let's take a look at the impact of these products of qualitative data analysis. So I pulled this from an evaluation report online. You can see right there is a theme. And here's an actually quite nicely short write-up of that theme. Here's a bunch of different frequency data. And here are the quotes. So for a write-up of a theme, this is actually pretty succinct. And I was like, okay, yeah, they did a good job with that. But it is still, when you look at it across all of data, it's a lot of pages of theme, frequency data, quotes, theme, frequency data, quotes. And the results of this is that you get pages and pages of write-ups that are often not that memorable and somewhat generic. If you look at the nature of the themes, youth engagement has been valued, some past struggles, a more positive present. These are, carefully developed by researchers. People don't sort of casually walk into, these are the themes in my research, but because they're meant to bring together a lot of different perspectives and different ways of phrasing things, they often are pretty generic and they have to be fairly general in how they're described. And then the nuance comes in the paragraphs. And so that becomes really hard when people are skimming. Okay, it doesn't have to be this way. You do not have to produce a report like this ever again. And I will say I have produced many reports that were much, much worse than that. Okay, so 30 ideas to inspire your visualization of qualitative data. Most of these take under 20 minutes. Again, on the theme of I want this to be something that is useful for the rest of your life. I'm giving you examples that can be built in Excel, PowerPoint, very basic Microsoft products. Any data visual, with a couple of exceptions, can be built in pretty much any statistical package, in a lot of the sort of more standard visualization packages, things like Canva. There's a lot of different options for where and how you build data visuals. And the same range of charts are available to be built in a lot of different platforms. But because Excel and PowerPoint are, at least at this point in history, very ubiquitous, that's where we're going to be focusing. And then I'll give you 10 tips to elevate visuals regardless of what type you are using. This presentation was really inspired by the re-release of this thing here, the Qualitative Chart Chooser. So it was updated recently with a whole series of new options. And then this breakdown of when to use what kinds of options for qualitative data. We will go through all of these. And then I have actually added a number of other ones that I like, or sort of slight variations on a theme that I think might be useful. I highly recommend this book. I taught in the Masters in Public Policy program, course in data visualization, and we actually went through step by step how to build graphs with this book and found it incredibly helpful for just getting comfortable with the basics of how you manipulate a lot of the standard defaults in Excel to be able to produce things that are so much more beautiful than a lot of the default graphics that are available. Okay, so let's get started. 30 options. Option 1, you can create a quote with emphasis. So if you want to have something stand out, for instance, your theme, the importance of youth, importance of their voice, you can highlight it in a bold color and use a neutral color for everything else so that what you want to stand out in the quote right there, front and center. And then, of course, you can use a nice complementary color. You can put a box around it. Nothing about this is particularly fancy, but it does a really good job of both helping break up a page and helping to really emphasize, look, this theme is directly in the quote. Similarly, you can do something like this with a picture that reinforces the nature of the quote. You do not need to use pictures of actual people involved in whatever it is that you are documenting. If you don't have that available, feel free to use stock photos, but just acknowledge that they're stock photos. Okay, a quote with a chart. This is all of the basics. This is a theme. This is the percentage of people that reference that theme. Here's a quote about that theme. This is nothing different than what was in that heading of a theme. And then paragraph, it's just a much more succinct version of the same basic bits of information made in a way that is hopefully a little bit more visually compelling and memorable, such that your goal when you're doing data visualization is that people will remember the information that you're telling them is most important within your analysis. And so when you make things really succinct, you are more likely to have people remember, because it's here and it's here, that 82% said that youth voices were better. Okay, option 4, we're moving right along. We have a color-coded table. So again, this is based on the same example. And here, these are the themes that they pulled together from the focus groups in this study. And then this is made up data on my part because I didn't have this information. But if you want to show the range of how many people validated a particular theme, because not everyone signs on to every theme, as you know from your analysis. And so it becomes really interesting to be able to use colors to say, okay, the main area for improvement is communication is a theme that absolutely everybody agreed on. But some past struggles and a more positive presence, you had 74 to 50% saying, yes, that's a real case. 24 to 1% saying, no, actually, I don't see that as an issue. And then again, 1 to 24% say no comment. You can obviously go more for fine-grained, but for this example, I kept it pretty generic. So you're able to see both the range of themes, but also the dominant perspectives and the level of divergence. So it provides more information about the range than what you commonly are able to see. There's another version here of a color-coded table that you may be familiar with if you've used a lot of QDA software. So this is just a co-occurrence table from Deduce. And right away, even without a legend, I see this little lone red cell and I go, oh, okay, that is the most common co-occurrence of codes. Good to know. I don't need to do any particular work other than spot that little red cell and go up to the column and over to the row. And that tells me what I need. And so the nice thing about a color-coded table, just like here, honing in on this one, it tells you where to go. You're able to see pretty quickly, okay, this is what I want to focus on. And we're going to be looking for the next several options at a lot of different tables. And that ability to hone in across a whole range of data on this is the stuff that's most important is one of the really most important points in how you construct a table so that it's as easy as possible for people to be able to engage with the range of data, but focus in on what's most critical. Color-coded tables do not have to look like tables. So this was originally a New York Times graphic, and it was actually reproduced in Excel by the guy at this link. And then I actually reproduced it in Excel because I had never done a bubble chart before. And yeah, very doable. A lot of like futzing around, but doable. So there is nothing different from any other table here, except that these are dots instead of different colors. In general, circles are not something that many of us in data visualization are particularly fond of if people are meant to gather information about relative values from the actual size of the circles. But when the number is right within the circle and easily visible, and the circle doesn't really matter, then it works just fine. And so this is a case where it's a really interesting, attractive visual. You get the point very quickly of sort of what matters on either side in this visual. It's just a table, but it looks both appealing enough that somebody really wanted to reproduce it and is able to convey a lot of information and divergence of information while still allowing people to get at dominant themes right away. Okay. Option 5, word clouds. So word clouds are generally not a favorite of those of us who do a lot of data visualization because, and you'll hear this theme over and over again, your job as a researcher is not just to give out data and information, it's actually to do the analysis and the interpretation. And so when you just do a giant word cloud, you're asking the audience to take something from it. And oftentimes that is not necessarily what you intended. And words without context are very hard to be able to make real sense of in terms of what that means. However, the exception that has been winning a fair bit of support is when you use data visuals to be able to reflect major differences between two groups. So this was a 2017 doctoral thesis by 2 McMaster students. I will leave it to you to determine which word cloud is which. But one of the things to really pay attention to is that when you have a heading that makes a definitive statement about what is important within the data, so Canadians more upbeat than US neighbors, at least on Twitter, then people are going to hone in on, say, the words that had to be bleeped out because they weren't appropriate, things like great and amazing. They're not going to pay as much attention to words like center or morning or sleep or yeah. You are telling them what the focus of the difference between these two word clouds is, even the coloring, is again re-emphasizing that difference. And so because you have stated that and hopefully done more than just created the word clouds, like actually been able to get clear data, much more rigorous data about the difference in sort of upbeatness in broader postings that people are doing, then this is a lovely way to be able to summarize that. You just want to make sure that you're not just doing the word cloud, you have something behind it that really validates what you are stating in your title, which is really what's pointing people to what they should take from the data that you're sharing within the word. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about different options for matrix charts. So this is one that I just pulled off the web because there's a lot of different data pieces in here. And I think because there aren't that many instances, there's 5 restaurants, it works to have all of this information. If this was, 60 pieces of data and this big long list, this would all get really overwhelming, but it works when it's a small amount. So, if you had themes here, or if you had something that was just a couple of individuals that you were featuring, and then you had multiple data points, you can have something that's long like this and looks at a bunch of different data points within a single table. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, all the features, and then 5. Okay, here's another version of a matrix chart that's basically looking at 2 different elements, changes in T by doing different things to it, and then the effect and a rating of strong, medium, and weak. And in order to help people focus clearly on where they should pay attention within this chart with a lot of different cells, they just created a rating scale. And there's nothing magical about the rating scale. In this case, they sort of overweighted strong so that that affects the scores. But what the scores allow you to do, and the fact that they're bolded, is to tell you right away that a lot of the sort of action in terms of columns is in the taste column. And a lot of the effect across the board is when you're adding water. Not terribly interesting, but you can begin to see this is a relatively easy way of being able to point people to what's interesting. I tend to prefer colors to symbols because you don't need as much of a coding structure. A lot of that is intuitive for people. This works, and the scoring can be kind of a nice way to be able to focus people on columns and rows. Okay, this is another version of the same basic thing. Again, you have scores, you have ranks. This is departments, and then how far they have gotten on training. This one, again, this is all the same basic structure, but slightly different variations in how the charts are constructed. So in this case, you have plants that are producing manufacturing items. You have the models of the items, and then you have the companies. And so you can look at model versus company and be able to talk about large versus, and then you can look at model versus plant, and again, large versus small volume. Okay, this is a very similar structure. Employees in the middle. Here you have the projects that they worked on. Just going to the bold, you can see that Zachariah worked on the most projects, and the dominant project that had 4 people on it was the spoilage reduction. And then you can see the skills of everyone. And so you can see, okay, Sammy has the most skills, and the dominant skill is standard operating procedures. So that can be pretty useful. You can imagine in a context where you're trying to sort of plan out future projects, having a sense of something like this can be really useful. This is another version that's particular to the relationships between things when there's sort of a specific connection across all of the dimensions within your spreadsheet. So I kind of like adjacency matrix. I have matrices, but I have not yet had an opportunity to use one. This is an X-shaped matrix diagram. So this is really 4 diagrams in one. One is the relationship between companies and the trade lines. One is between trade lines and facilities. One is between facilities and models and companies. And in either case, large volume versus small volume. That to me is more than 1 degree too far in terms of just the complexity of a single visual and the likelihood that people are going to be able to engage with it. So I quickly built an alternative version of this X-shaped matrix, which is just 4 color-coded, this is what's called small multiples, where you're asking people to engage with the relationship between these, but hopefully each piece is easy enough to interpret that it's not so overwhelming to be able to interpret the relationships. At least for me, I am less interested in having to really spend my time interpreting this. And I find this still not terribly appealing to interpret, but easier to interpret. Okay. Option 7, heat maps. So we're still in the world of tables. And the real difference with heat maps is that it's color first. You don't have data within the table. You are using the colors to be able to tell the story. There are 2 different versions of heat maps. You can have discrete colors like this, where each one represents part of a Likert scale. And then you can have ones that represent continuous variables, where they're sort of variable shades going across. So this was one of actually the first things I saw by Stephanie Evergreen. And I was so impressed because it was interviews with, as you can see, 15 volunteers. And across 15 volunteers, they got input on, 6 different dimensions. Here are the overall findings from those 5 interviews. And then they use this color coding of the people who say things are going great. Here's an example quote around doing great. Here's an example quote around doing okay. Here's one around needing some work. Here's one around needing a lot of work. You have a summary of 15 probably pretty extensive interviews, all in a half of a page. And it's visually appealing. So this won me over pretty quickly. Okay, option 8, a spectrum display. So I'll give you a much simpler example that I built, but I'll walk you through this one first. And this one comes from Stephanie Evergreen. Actually, I believe she saw it in a journal article and then she reproduced it. The way it's structured, it's obviously like a fan shape. So there are 34 individuals that were part of this study, and they were looking at how much time they were spending on computers at a public library. So these sort of breaks in the fan represent different amounts of time that they're spending. And then the cylinders, circulars, the parts that fan out represent what they were doing. So sign up and bill pay, search, browse, jobs, email. For whatever reason, email is this color rather than this. I think that's just a mistake. Anyway, this is not a particularly fun graphic, especially with 34 people, to spend a lot of time analyzing. So it's really useful for the researcher to do the job for you and tell you in the heading, this is what is most interesting in this data. And so here they say most people who use the computer for more than 30 minutes were doing job-related things. And you look and you go, okay, jobs is orange. Yep, that is true. But, oh, look, there's 4 people who were also doing email, and there were 4 people who were also doing search and browse. So yes, dominant, but not everything. Interesting. Okay. And then signing up and paying bills took less than 25 minutes for all participants, but 1 person. And so you go here and you look, oh, sure, there's the 1 person. And yeah, everybody else took less than 25 minutes. So she's telling you these are the things that really stand out in the data, but you're able then, if you want to spend more time with all of the data and not just have to engage with what she's telling you is interesting, but be able to start there so that if you're only going to spend a little bit of time with the data, you're not stuck having to interpret yourself. But if you want to engage much more deeply, and if you want to explore, a wide variety of things and see if you can see something in the data that the researcher didn't pick out. You can. And that's a real advantage when you're able to show divergence within your data and not just talk about what's common. And yes, you can build this in Excel in under 20 minutes. The base of it is just a stacked donut chart with a whole size at 0, and then it's a bunch of fiddling. So this is one that I built that's much more sort of straightforward and simple. Again, based on the survey that we started out with, this idea that, okay, here are some sort of core themes of the value of a program, and we can look at sort of who responded to each, and then take a look at whether it looks like there's sort of commonalities and what people selected. In this case, I didn't see any. So, the title I picked was "No One Gained All Benefits, but All Gained Some." And someone can kind of quickly look and go, yep, that is true. Okay, I can take that away from this graph. And then if they want to spend more time on it. Okay, a sunburst, option 9. Oh, I have nothing to say. Okay, so this was done by The Guardian. And again, it's a huge amount of data. So around the outside, you have every US state broken out into regions. And then you have this great legend built right into the center that tells you what the color coding is, but you get the general gist, and you can always kind of go back and refer back to this as you're looking at things. But generally, how people are looking at this is they're just starting out with general patterns, and they're noticing, oh, okay, a lot less in the southeast, this sort of divergence in the northwest, this divergence in the Midwest, a lot of commonality in the Northeast, fair bit of commonality in the Southwest. You can see that all pretty quickly. And then it becomes about the nuances and people having often a lot of interest. This graph actually generated a great deal of interest in people sort of understanding the particularities of individual states and the nature of their laws. Huge amount of data conveyed in a way that is engaging to people and highly informative. Okay, option 10, sliders. So a slider is no different than if you were to just cut it off here and do this as, a bar chart, something like that. You do need to make sure that where you put a dot on a slider actually represents the data. So, for efficacy, this is looks like right about 50%. You are not including a number in your slider. You can, but in this case, there is no number in the slider, but it does need the position within this does need to be reflective of the actual percentage. And so these are the kinds of choices we're going to talk about. You don't need to feature every piece of data. If what you want is for people to sort of at a glance have a sense of, okay, belonging is the lowest. This is what they're sort of highlighting, modest sense of belonging. And you can see, okay, yeah, there's slightly better with identity, there's better with efficacy, but none of them are particularly high. If that's what you want people to take away, taking away the percentages can actually be really useful because people can just sort of at a glance see, okay, yeah, I see that. If you wanted to even make this a little bit stronger, I might do a little line right at the midpoint just to make it a little bit easier for people to be able to see exactly where these are. Okay, a gauge. These are just kind of fun. They're easy to build. So again, if you're coding and you know that you're going to code, in this case, how people feel about the engagement of management, you can be able to show the overall theme of sort of how people generally feel, but also on the scale. So, the theme here is that in Division F, management isn't that involved. But you can see it's not all the way down here. Not everybody agrees with that. You don't have the individual data like some of the ones that we've been looking at, but you do have a sense that where this is landing, one, you have to actually build it intentionally into the right spot. You can't just put it randomly. But that does actually represent some divergence in opinion around sort of 100% agreement that the management isn't involved. and then you have a quote. Okay, option 12, Harvey balls. And this is again a matrix that has, just like the one about the restaurants, has a lot of different information in a single table. So we have the products, price, accessibility, quality, branding, and a sample quote. And in this case, color is doing a lot for us. So you can see that things that are blue are referencing good points. Things that are in orange are referencing bad points. And the researcher, in this case, Stephanie, is saying people thought the price was good. They felt the branding work was bad. And then you can take a quick look and go, yeah, people thought the price was good. Not universally. There's some slight divergence, real divergence around accessibility, a little bit of divergence around quality. And yeah, everyone is pretty universally in agreement that branding is bad. And then you have these sample quotes, which again are color coded to highlight these are the two things that you should really pay attention to: pricing and branding. This is super easy to build. You just go within Excel, symbols, choose Sego UI symbol. I don't know how to say that. And you'll see your Harvey balls right here. I built one quickly within Excel. It was literally, I think, 4 minutes. Okay. Option 13, icons and colors. So this comes up when you have a lot of data and maybe you are doing a longer report or doing sections even of a book. It can be really useful to, if you have a series of themes. So again, these were the themes from the focus group from our example at the beginning, to just pick an icon that represents that theme, that helps people to remember what that theme is, because they link the icon to what it is that you're saying the theme is. And then everything that is referenced in that goes below that icon, uses that color scheme, and helps you to be able to chunk out what can often be a huge amount of text into subsections that feel much more manageable. Okay, option 14, a diagram. So in this case, we have a theme, gaps in service availability. We have 31 people who reference that. You can see down here, n equals 50. And then we have a quote here. But the other thing that we have is this little diagram. And so it's taking the individual things that people said and saying, we think that there's this relationship between all of these sub elements that are nested in this broader theme of gaps in service availability, that this is how they're related. And so if people in your sample didn't tell you that, and you can't go back to them, you can't just assume that you understand the relationship in their minds between these things. However, we had so much information across all of what people said and our own kind of understanding of the field, such that we felt comfortable being able to build this in order to come back to the people who initially responded and say, you said there were gaps in service availability, and then you reference these things. Here's the relationship that, from what you said and our own experience, we think exists between these to explain gaps in service availability. What's right and what's wrong here? Does this look accurate? What are we missing? And so, because of having that opportunity to be able to go back to people and verify it, what got produced was not just a theme, not just a number, not just the quote, but a more sort of detailed diagram of a set of causal mechanisms that allow for being able to target ways of addressing this gap in service availability. So it goes beyond being that sort of challenge with themes that, it can be kind of generic, into some very specific things that could be done that would help to address that gap. Okay, option 15, a Venn diagram. This one's just fun. I almost never use Venn diagrams, but every once in a while, it's really useful for being able to show the relationship between particularly themes or core ideas. Okay, option 16, a placement diagram. This can be really useful if you're doing observational studies or if you have sort of spatial elements to your work. So again, color is sort of being used heavily here. More participation is in this darker blue, and right away you can see that what they are stating certainly appears to be true, that those towards the front and those in the center are more engaged, and those in the back and off to the sides are less engaged. Timelines. There are many different ways that you can portray timelines, and it's not actually that hard to do something that's pretty compelling. So I'll start with this one because I just found it so charming. So this was done by Stephanie Evergreen and just uses these sort of hand-drawn icons to show the agenda for a workshop. And so the core sections of the presentation that are being offered are covered here. And they didn't just pick the first page of a section, they picked the one that was most visually appealing and then put the title of what that talk was going to be on there. So that, for a presentation on presenting data, it's a very, very powerful agenda. I have done something very similar because I was just so inspired by this one. I use something like this a lot when there are sort of extended processes for doing things. Being able to show, some version of a Gantt chart can be really useful. And then calendars can actually be really nice to be able to reflect processes over time, depending on how much space you have. Obviously, this takes a lot more space than this does, but these can be sometimes a little frustrating to read. And because we are so used to calendars, this can be really easy to skim. Okay, option 18. Can you believe it? 18 only, and we have 30. So a journey map has become actually really appealing. It came, I believe, out of the sort of world of marketing and customer service, and has really caught on in a lot of spaces to be able to document how people move through process. And so if you're able across a lot of people to capture how people feel at both what are the steps in a process, how do those break out into discrete stages that you define, and then how are people feeling about the process at each point. Again, huge amount of data that is actually really easy for people to interpret. Right away, you can just go across this bottom and go, okay, there's our to-do list for things that we want to try to fix. You can go across the top and go, okay, that's what's going well. And then you'd basically have a to-do list of, okay, first round, second round, third round, fourth round. And then check in again and see if everything's up here and doing great or things have started to shift. It's incredibly actionable. And that's what good data visualization allows people to be able to take the data and do something with it. Okay, option 19, timeline ticks. So in this case, this is a inverse timeline where you start with today and then you go backwards. And the title says exactly what they want you to pay attention to. A few students haven't felt agency in the last 60 days. So you look and you go, okay, yeah, there's 4 students who haven't felt agency in the last 60 days. And then, of course, I go immediately to, oh, wow, one hasn't felt it in 180 days. Nobody has felt it in the last, hard to tell what that is, maybe like 4 or 5 days. So there's a lot that you can actually sort of interpret in here. You don't have to only pay attention to the thing that's being called out in the heading. But again, it's a way to be able to get you into the data and pay attention to the thing that the researcher thinks is most worth calling your attention to. Okay, option 20, time use. So this is just a pie chart, but via coloring, you're saying this is what's important within the pie. And then because this is time use, make it look like a clock. When this was when this was designed, the time use studies was looking at a lot of comparisons of time across different people in different circumstances. And so being able to do side by side clocks was both really nice in terms of just being able to show the difference. If you think of small multiples and being able to just see quickly, sort of, here's the difference between these. But then also, because it looks like a clock, reminding people that this isn't abstract data, but this is actually about people's time. And you'll see some of the visualizations that I'm focusing on. I think a lot about sort of the meaning of the data and try to have the visualization reflect that to the extent that it can. Okay, histomaps. So a histomap is available if you have repeated engagement with a group for at least 3 time periods. It's certainly better if you have more. And you can be able to show people's experiences over that time. So they want to see less change in the curriculum. Yep, than they used to. And they want to see more change regarding peer interaction than they used to. Yep, I see that too. And then you've got your little quotes. This was built in built in Excel. Here's a classic histomap that's looking at power over 4,000 years of world history across different countries. This was quite a famous one. Option 22, dendrograms. So if you are doing cluster analysis, a dendrogram is sort of a nice way to be able to help people see at a glance which clusters are worth paying attention to. So again, the title says it all. At least 80% of participants agreed around clusters related to community impact. That's this one. And personal benefits. That's this one. So you can see, okay, these are the clusters that pay attention, that matter. And then for all of the other clusters, you can see, oh, okay, this is how closely they connect. So it gives you a lot of information, but again, with the color, focuses you in on the things that are most important to being able to understand this. You must be doing cluster analysis to be able to use a dendrogram. Okay, option 23, a Sankey diagram. So a Sankey diagram is useful particularly for hierarchical information. And so in this case, we're working with harm reduction initiatives. And one of the things that we're thinking about as the research team on this is that harm reduction can mean a lot of different things. And it's very easy for people to associate it with a very limited set of ways of reducing harm. Particularly, I think a lot of people think of safe injection as sort of a poster child of what harm reduction is. Well, in this case, what we wanted to show was that it actually looks like different things to different people. And so people who said that they had actually reduced the harm of their drug use, we wanted to show what that looked like for different people. Okay, option 24, change photos. So sometimes you have actual photos, flooded, not flooded. You can use just simple icons or stock photography. This sort of note below is that if you're using sort of stock photo pages, many of them have the option where you can select the same model so that you can show people in multiple positions. So the example that she has here is she was looking for a stressed doctor, and then she was able to click and have the same person looking happy and drinking a beer. So change photos can be really valuable for just honing in on a theme and helping people to remember it. Again, just like icons, it's a way of being able to take something that is written and really make it visceral and visual and easy to remember. Okay, option 25, a network map. So this was a massive amount of data from peer-reviewed publications in medicine. And so in this case, we color-coded. So this was just sort of a general network map, and nothing was sort of automatically color-coded. We actually color-coded everything based on the nature of what the study keyword was and classified it into these 4 categories. And then we're able to use this to really show that the program that my colleague Fei Yu and I were working in at the time was really doing everything that it was meant to be doing in terms of advancing all of the fields of medical innovation. Okay, concept map or mind map. So this is from Morgan State, and it's a concept map about concept maps. If you yourself or you know someone who can draw, hand-drawn ones are absolutely beautiful. For a while, there was a real buzz around having people do sort of drawing notes at conferences. And so you would often have sort of big versions of things like this as people were brainstorming to do a concept map or a mind map to be able to reflect sort of the group consensus. And so some of these can be really beautiful and really interesting to people. A subset of this is what's called a ripple effects map. And so the idea of a ripple effects map is that you are either looking at from direct interventions to other people or other situations that are affected by the direct interventions, and or from direct interventions to things that happened later in time. And so ripple effects are a really good way of being able to look at indirect effects of something that maybe there's an intervention that with youth, and the indirect effects are actually much more significant in the mind of the organization than the direct effects. Well, this is a really good way of being able to highlight just the sheer volume of indirect effects from the direct effects. And then depending on what the intervention is, I have seen ripple effects maps that go, 5, 6 levels out and can make credible cases with evidence for each link within these chains. Option 28, you can quantify for a bar chart. So this was from a series of interviews with youth about what kind of programs they were interested in. And we had a huge amount of data because we asked each youth about all of these different programs. And then they were able to sort of rate it on a scale of interest. And so in order to make it much easier for people to digest, for this particular graph, we focused only on those things that youth were very strongly interested in. So these percentages reflect those that had sort of the highest enthusiasm within the Likert scale. And we're able to sort of quickly see, okay, here's the top ones that are of interest, and here are the ones that there is no real interest in terms of very strong interest. There was interest in these, and that's why it was important to sort of look at the other dimensions of these Likert scales. But in terms of things that people were most enthusiastic about, you've got the highs and you've got the lows. Okay. You can choose how you visualize things. So, a Likert scale can be a lot of different things. It can be a 100% bar chart. There are different ways you can do it in a pie. There are different ways to be able to sort of show the relationship of percentages within a Likert scale. In this case, the sense was that the data was about the sort of incorporation of new training into services. And so in thinking about that, it seemed like, okay, it's really easy to build stair steps. And we can just represent what we want to show in the data with these stair steps. There's nothing brilliant about it. It's not in any way complex or difficult to build, but it's just a different way of doing it than doing a whole bunch of pie charts, than doing a whole bunch of bar charts. And we had a lot of different pieces. And so being able to mix things up and use a different visual form for being able to say the same thing was really useful. Okay. Option 30, concepts across geography. Explanatory. In this case, smaller geographic area, being able to put a filter over, I believe this is a Google map. And you can use this as sort of the starting place for a whole analysis and highlight individual sections, color code them, talk about individual parts of this for a full analysis, but this can be a really useful way of being able to sort of ground the whole of what you're talking about and keep coming back to it to be able to fill in all of the pieces. Okay. So that is 30 qualitative data visualization options. I hope that gives you some real ideas. Now I want to do 10 tips for better data visuals. So tip number 1, use the title to make the point of the graph. We've talked about that a lot. Here is what I recommend not doing. And here's an example again from Stephanie Evergreen of what works really well in terms of doing the work for them to tell them what is important to find in the graph. Tip 2, get rid of extraneous information. You couldn't tell at a glance, but this is just a bar chart. That is all that's particularly necessary to take from this to get to what they have in the title. Ditch extraneous content. So I could have a legend here. Instead, I use text boxes to put the legend right up above so that it's easier for people to access. I could have a scale, but instead put the numbers directly into the bars. This makes it much easier for people to be able to engage with the data because they don't have to go reference things. Okay, use a condensed font. You can tell the real difference between the two of these in terms of just visual appeal and also space. Tip 4, recolor using color schemes and color with purpose. So this is a default Excel color scheme from a while back. And this is one of my favorites that Stephanie Evergreen used. It's an intentional color scheme. And, if you spend time online, you can find a lot of sort of deliberate color schemes and choose one that makes sense for your work. I've seen ones that sort of respond to national colors that are about different nations. When we do reports for organizations, we use the color schemes of the organizations and then complementary colors. So being deliberate with color can really set the mood for your whole report, and then being consistent with it across what you do. Choose the right graph type. So this is a qualitative chart chooser that you saw earlier. Here is a quantitative chart chooser. And you cannot use every graph for every purpose. And so being able to understand what you're trying to do here, and then use the graphs that are appropriate to that. Again, choose the right graph type. I built this based on something I remember seeing a while ago where someone just didn't recognize that they didn't really understand the data, and it went up to 180% of the US population, which does not work. So yeah, if you don't understand your data, you are going to make mistakes in how you approach visualizing it. Okay, tip 6, paste as pictures. So this was a histomap that I built. All of my little text boxes have to be highlighted as well as the overall visual. And then I save it as a picture. And what happens then is when I transfer it into the program that I'm actually writing the report in, or I'm doing the presentation in, I can size it up and down really easily without messing up the relative relationships between all of the pieces. Okay, tip 7, get feedback. The goal with data visualization is that you are keeping things as simple and succinct as possible, and you're using the titles and colors to point people to what matters most so that people can get the point of your graph very quickly. The fastest way to know if you have done that successfully is to ask someone who doesn't know anything about what you're doing whether they can tell you what the point of your graph is. Tip 8, experiment. So we'll just take a humble bar chart of, I was actually part of the sample for this one, people like on their tacos. So you can turn this from bars into lollipops, and you can organize it from most to least. You can say, you know what, I don't care about all of this. I'm going to look at the highest value, the lowest value, and then these proteins right in the middle. And I'm going to pull that out and just feature that as more giant lollipops. They don't have to be lollipops. As long as you are maintaining the relationships between the sizes of things, you can have anything here. And so I just kind of did this for fun with some icons. But the point is that you can really try a lot of different ways of being able to approach your visuals that are going to make them more memorable, that are going to have people stop and go, huh, let me pay attention to that. What's going on there? And that's the real power once you get comfortable with the basics of data visualization, is that you can start to really experiment. So to get comfortable with data visualization, the fastest and easiest way is to follow step-by-step instructions. Stephanie's book has step-by-step instructions for a lot of different graphs. Some are also available on her blog. There are a lot of places online. There are a lot of sort of YouTube channels where people will go through step-by-step instructions. If you have someone's data or you can recreate it easily, that is really an advantage to being able to just do exactly what they tell you to do. And then once you've done it once or twice, you can begin to adapt it. You can change it to other data. You can do something totally different with a color scheme. You can, change these from dumbbell plots to bars, whatever you want to do. Okay, tip 10, pay attention to whole pages. So this is 2 pages from a massive study. And it was really important to be able to keep people's attention. This one just happens to have a kind of large section of paragraph around what is missing. But for the most part, we kept writing at just a couple of sentences in these kind of paragraph pieces, and really focused on being able to articulate this overall assessment and then the basis for that assessment. So this was actually a 122 page entirely qualitative report that was actually incredibly well received. And there was a lot of excitement about it because people were able to quickly interpret what was happening and why. And they were able to see the raw data, but also the major point. And we sort of went out of our way to build this was sort of purely built into the coding structure to build this overall assessment and this assessment rubric in order that we could then take the results of any one of these sections and summarize it all at the very beginning, so that if people only wanted to pay attention to what are the things that we should just use the way they are, they would have this whole list and it would be sort of all set and easy for them. And then if they wanted to refer to individual pieces, they could just go to the table of contents and look up this much more detailed assessment of an individual piece. But it wasn't required for them to do that to be able to get the major point. Okay, we have come to the end of this. So I'm available at the university through June and happy to help with your visualizations. We also, if you are subscribed to Spark's newsletter, have a Polish Your Graph challenge where I'm featuring a graph that someone has provided or that I have kind of stumbled upon, and a remake of it. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a wonderful weekend.